This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
First and foremost, I want to thank Congregation Kol Yisrael Achim for hosting this unbelievable event. I could only say unbelievable not because of me, but because of Rabbi Palachi. I'm just like okay, this is the bonus afterwards. And for the beautiful spread, which apparently is just meant for show. No one's allowed to eat anything over here because this has to stay exactly the way that it is. And of course, thank you to Chazak. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys follow Chazak. I think everybody in the world knows Chazak. But if you follow them, every few hours to a few days, you get another 5 more lectures over here, across the world in every single location, and it's being live streamed by Torah Anytime. And of course, we have to thank Torah Anytime, and especially Achamim for coming out and recording us. By the way, this is why you could So Chazak Baruch for everybody, and especially for everybody that came here tonight. So, when you get to speak in public, you get a lot of people that talk to you and speak to you, and I get people that it really hurts me when I hear this. When they say, I've done so much bad, I'm a lost cause. I'm going to the Gehenna of the Gehenna. It's done. There's nothing for me to talk about. I'm why would you say that? You're alive. That means you could do something. But then you have the flip side. You have people that come. They don't keep Shabbat. They don't keep kosher. They don't keep tzniut. They don't do anything. And then they go and they're yeah, me and God, we're tight. And then they do this. Me and God, we're tight. I'm by the way, it's a wrong religion. It's a different religion for cross. And I'm look at the difference. How you have people that are shomer Torah mitzvot. They're doing everything that they need to. And they think that they're the lowest of the low. Then you have people that do nothing and think that they're the highest of the high. You have the people that they come and let's say they learn for 1 hour. They learn for, they say Tehillim with a lot of concentration. They come out, they think that the Baba Saleh be who wants brachot? Come here, I'll pour you some wine. Give me an arak over here, pouring everybody. They think they're the highest of the high. So I want to share with you a story tonight. A story of arguably the greatest Baal Tshuva of all time. And that is King Menashe. Now, in order to understand who King Menashe was and how he came into being, Menashe was the son of King Chizkiyahu. King Chizkiyahu was a righteous king. He was decimating Torah throughout the entire Jewish nation. Then, one day, he becomes deathly ill. And the prophet Yeshayahu, the prophet Isaiah, comes over to him and says, you're going to die and you're not going to live. And the Gemara in Bachot goes and explains, what does that mean, you're going to die and not live? It means that you're going to die in this world and you're not going to live in the next world. Now you're talking about one of the greatest kings of all times. The greatest of the great. You're going to die and not in this world and the next world? What did he do already? What did he do? So he asked the prophet, why? And it says, because you didn't have any children. So King Chizkiyahu goes over to the prophet and says, listen, I saw with divine inspiration, I saw with Ruach HaKodesh, I saw with prophecy that what's going to be of my children, they're going to be wicked. He says, why do I need to bring wicked children in the world? I decided I'm not getting married, I'm not bringing any children. You know what Yeshayahu answered him? He says, who are you to start making calculations? Leave the calculations to God. In our lives, we always make calculations. Okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go to Vegas, but then I'm going to learn so better because I'll be relaxed and I'll have this. We make excuses from today until tomorrow. We convince ourselves that we're the biggest tzaddikim for doing the biggest sins possible. And we're this is amazing. I'm connecting through God through gambling. This is this is how I connect to God. This is when I'm praying, And after all, that's when most people pray. Please God, come on, 21, right? That's what we're praying during this time. So, King Chizkiyahu goes over to the prophet Yeshayahu and he says, okay, you decree that, I see my decree, give me your daughter, I'll get married now. And the prophet says, I just told you you're going to die, you want me to give you my daughter? So you know what the king told him? He says, if you finish your prophecy, get up and leave. Because I was taught from my ancestors that even if you have a sharp sword on your neck, imminent death, you do not give up. We never give up, there is always hope. The prophet leaves. King Chizkiyahu turns over, faces the wall, and starts praying, crying, begging. God comes over to the prophet Yeshayahu, tells him, turn around, go back to King Chizkiyahu. Tell him that I've granted him another 15 years of life. He goes in, he gives him the message, he grants him another 15 years of life. And then he said, now give me your daughter for marriage. So he said, fine. And he gave him his daughter for marriage. Now, they had 2 children. One child died in an early age, and another child was Menashe. Menashe, at the age of 12, became king. He was king at the age of 12. Now, Menashe was one of the longest ruling kings in Jewish history. He ruled for 55 years. But for the first 22 years, he was one of the worst kings the Jewish nation have ever had. He went, and the Divrei Yamim goes and tells us that he went and he, not only did he worship idols, he placed idols everywhere and made everybody else also worship them. He also practiced in sorcery. He summoned up spirits. Not only that, the Gemara in Yevamot says that he was also a murderer. And who did he kill? He also killed his own grandfather, the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Yeshayahu. He killed. And if you think that's not bad at all, he went and he put an avodah zarah in the temple. In the Bet HaMikdash, he put an idol worship. I put an idol over there. Now, you may think, okay, this king probably didn't know any Torah, probably didn't know anything. Says the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Rav Ashi was giving a lecture, and he was finishing off right before speaking about the three kings. And then he said, tomorrow we're going to continue with the lecture with the three kings. And what did he say? He says, our colleagues, the three kings. That night, King Menashe goes over to him in a dream. He says, you call me your colleague? He says, you think I'm your colleague? He says, let me ask you a question. Where do you cut the bread from when you make hamotzi? So he starts thinking, he says, to be honest, I don't know. So then the King Menashe says, you call me your colleague and you don't know this halakha? So Rav Ashi says, okay, please, so tell me what the halakha. Tomorrow when I give the lecture, I'm going to mention it in your name. So he says, you know where you cut it from? You cut it from where it crusts. That's where you cut it from. So ask Rav Ashi, he says, if you're such a big Talmid Chacham, if you knew so much Torah, how are you that you are so involved with idolatry? How are you so involved with Avodah Zarah? And he responded back to him, he says, if you were in my time, you would have picked up the hem of your cloak and you would have run towards the doing Avodah Zarah, doing idolatry. You don't know the desire that we had back then. You don't know what we had to go through. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, page 90, goes and tells us that there are three kings that have no share in the world to come. Menashe is listed as one of the kings that have no share in the world to come. Rabbi Yehuda goes and says Menashe does have a share in the world to come because he did tshuva. Now, how did Menashe do tshuva? What was his? When did he do tshuva? How did it happen? So Hashem tried to send messages to King Menashe and the Jewish people. Repent, return to your rightful ways. It didn't help. Then Hashem sent the Assyrian army, and they captured King Menashe. They led him in chains back to Babylon, back to Babylonia. And he went over there, and you know what they did? They put him in this copper pot. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it. There's in the olden days when they used to torture people, there was something known as the brazen bull. The brazen bull was a torture, it was really a death trap, where they had this copper brazen bull, and there was like one opening on the top, and they would put the person inside, lock it, and then they would light a fire under it. And slowly, the person would roast to death. And what they did was that they would put like a horn inside the bull, that it went out to the mouth. And the only way that the person will be able to breathe is if he goes and breathes through that horn. But when he screams, it was like an acoustic, technical, situation, that whenever he would scream, it would turn the sound into a lower pitched voice and it would sound like a bull. It was one of the avodas, or whatever it is. Well, this is what they did. And this is where they put Menashe, not into the bull, but into like this pot. And they lit a fire under him, and he was roasting. So he started and he called out to every single idol that he knows. He prayed to this idol, and no one was answering him. Finally, he says, you know what? Let me pray to God. And you know what he said? He says, if goes and if God listens to me, then good. But if not, then I see that this God is just the same as all the other gods. And he went and he gave it this prayer. The angels saw this prayer coming up. They wanted to block it, shield it, deflect it, karate chop it out. Not doing over here. Are you crazy? Somebody who put an avodah zarah in the temple, now you're praying, now you want to be saved? You know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did? He said, what's it going to be if I don't accept this prayer? What about the future people that they want to do tshuva? They're going to say, there's no hope. Look, he tried to do tshuva. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, made a hole under his kisei hakavod. And he went and he grabbed that tshuva and he saved King Menashe. And he brought him back to Jerusalem, and he reigned for another 33 years. And for 33 years he was doing tshuva. He removed the idolatries, he tried to follow the path of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, when you think about his tshuva was done out of desperation. It was under duress. Like imagine, this is how Rabbi Frand goes and explains this. He says, imagine someone hurt you, comes over to you, and says, shaking, like really shaking, he says, I'm so sorry for everything that I've done for you. Please forgive me. And you're like, wow, I did not expect this. And then you lean a little bit to the side and you see there's a guy pointing a gun to the back of this guy's head. And the guy's saying, you better say I'm sorry, I'm going to shoot you. Are you going to be like, well, apology accepted. You obviously meant it. They're like, are you kidding me? Absolutely not. Imagine scenario. A guy comes home, did something bad to his wife. Pick your fancy of whatever it was. And he comes home, she's wearing a backpack and a flamethrower. And in the corner of the room is all his prized possessions. Like the baseball that it was signed by blah, 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 whoever's famous. And then like everything like that's the priceless things that he had. And then she's like, you didn't say goodbye to me this morning. And she's like, cocks it. And it's like, what do you say about that? And he's like, no, no, I'm sorry, I'm my darling, I love you. Like, let me propose to you again. It's like, whatever you want, please, it's okay. And she's like, oh, yeah, no, it's okay. It's like, that's all I wanted. She takes off the thing, puts it on the side. She's like, was that so hard? Right? Shalom bayit. So yeah, that's unbelievable. This is great. Is that a real apology? She was going to burn all his stuff, possibly burn him also. So how is it when Menashe is literally burning to death, and he goes and he says, okay, fine, God, okay, let's see. I'm sorry. And then God says, yeah, let's accept this. This is great. Do we understand the level of that tshuva? If we see that if Menashe's tshuva went and was accepted, then what does it say about our tshuva? We have so much potential. We always come, we say, well, there's no hope. No hope? Did you put an avodah zarah in the temple? Did you murder your own grandfather? Please don't tell me if you did. We think we're the worst people. We think we have absolutely no chance of survival. We think we have no chance. It's coming Yom Kippur. It's coming the greatest, the holiest day of the year. And we're coming and we have the opportunity to tell God, I'm sorry. Oh, but it's under duress. I'm nervous. I'm going to have a good year. It doesn't matter. However it goes, you have the opportunity. I want to share with you a story. There was once a couple, an amazing couple, did so much chesed, did unbelievable things, but unfortunately they couldn't have any children. They went from specialist to specialist, from doctor to doctor, from Kabbalist to Kabbalist. They tried everything that they could. Nothing helped, unfortunately. Nothing helped. They finally, years go by, and the wife, she's always just like picturing, it's like, oh, like daydreaming. Like one day, like some little boy's gonna come in and be like, Mommy, hold you. Mommy, hold me. Mommy, I'm hungry. And every time she would think about, tears would swell in her eyes. And she would daydream pushing a stroller, down the street, taking to the park. And unfortunately, she wasn't blessed with children. 20 years go by. She's about to give up. She says, listen, there's no more hope, obviously. God does not want this for us. And then suddenly, out of the blue, she goes and she tells her husband, we're pregnant! Are you serious? We're pregnant! The husband says, what? And they're jumping on the couches, doing backflips. They're like, it's unbelievable. The next day, the husband goes into the office. Everybody gets a bonus. Even the guy he was going to fire, now he's not getting fired. Like everybody is on the highest level now, right, at this point. And, the time goes by and they're like, the husband and the wife, they're talking to the baby, they're listening to, showing them the music, they're doing all the research of what you need to do to make sure this baby's going to come out the smartest Einstein possible. They're doing everything right. And then the husband is at work. He gets a phone call. It's the wife. She says 2 words. It's time. He's like, like his eyes dim down. He puts on his ninja outfit. He takes her to the backpack. He goes, he flips over the chair under that. He gets to his car, slides on the hood. He gets to the other side. He's gone in 60 seconds. He's there. He's in the zone. He rushes her. They go to the hospital. He's doing the, what is it called, Lamaze breathing, for himself. And his wife was, epidural, whatever it was. He's like, I'm breathing. He's relaxed. Everything, Baruch Hashem, is going great. They're going, and after a few short minutes or few short hours, depending on how much you know on labor, there is a mazal tov. It's a baby boy. And the mother, the first time that she holds that little baby boy, she looks into the little boy's eyes, and then she starts bursting out into tears. She starts shaking. She starts bursting out into tears. Thank you. Thank you, God, so much for this. She's like, she could not believe what she was holding in her hand. This prized possession. This boy grows up lacking nothing. The parents give them whatever the boy wants. But they disciplined him. They were very smart of what they did. This boy was a wild kid. At 6 years old, the father comes home and he sees the boy standing on top of the china closet. Like this. Like he's ready to jump. And in slow motion, the father's like, no, please. And the boy just leaps out, grabs onto the chandelier, and it does like a swing. 1, 2, and then on the floor. And he runs over, they pick up the 6-year-old, he's shaken up, he's crying. They rush him to the hospital, they rush him to the urgent care, they go and they get him badged up. Only afterwards, they try and they go, listen, please don't swing from the lights. This is not a good idea. You see what happens when you swing from the chandelier. And, time goes on. About a few weeks go by, and then they realize they have to discipline him again. And then a few weeks go by, and again they're disciplining him, and again and again. And his problems, with the friends and with the schools get worse and worse as he gets older. They send him to therapists, they send him to psychiatrists, they send him to meditation specialists, they put him on they try everything they can, but nothing helps. By the age of 15, he gets kicked out of 4 schools. And then he meets friends that no parents want their children to hang out with. And his behavior gets from bad to worse. And then his religion goes from the little that he was keeping to absolutely nothing. And they tried whatever they could. Like, please, they were begging him, please, wear a kippah, maybe put on some tzitzit. Why don't you put on tefillin today? Daddy will give you extra some money. Nothing helped. He would come home every night, 3, 4 in the morning. The parent, and he was high, he was blitzed off his head, he was, not in the right mindset. And the parents, especially the mother, every night would wait up for him. And every night she would call and be like, when are you coming home, darling, my darling sweetheart? He's like, Mommy wants to go to sleep, are you able to come home? He would say, stop calling me. Like, who do you think you are? Like, let me be who I want to be. I am in charge of my own life. And then he hangs up the phone. And no matter how many times he would say this to her, it hurt every single time. One day, she comes home and she sees he's hanging out with his friends out in the front lawn. And he sees her, so he tells his friends, Yalla, we're going. And as they're going, the son goes to his mother, says, I'm going out with my friends. So she says, okay, no problem. She says, she comes over to give him a hug and a kiss. And he's like, what are you doing? And he actually pushes her away. And then he starts screaming at her in public. He says, don't act like you're a good mother. Don't act like you care. You're a terrible mother, and you always call me, you always bother me. You said, I hate you. And he ran off. The mother was shaking, turned white as a ghost. Runs into the house, starts crying like a baby. Her husband comes home a few hours later, she's still crying. And her eyes are like red, nose is like swollen. She's like, what's going on? And she tells him everything that happened. Father goes and says, stopping here. This is stopping tonight. I am taking care of this. And she's like, whoa, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? He's like, don't worry about it. I'm taking care of this. So that night, they wait. The boy comes in 6 in the morning. They're both sitting there on the couch. The kid gets up, the father's all night, the mother's nervous, so the father all night, he's talking to himself, he's pacing back and forth, and he's going to come here, I'm going to show him who's boss, like I'm telling you. And I go, he thinks he's the boss, he goes up there, and he's like, please don't tell him that, don't do that. And she's trying to calm down, nothing helps. Comes home at 6 in the morning, the father jumps up, and he says, apologize to your mother. And he's like, what? He's like, why should I apologize? He says, what I do? I spoke how I feel? He says, what's wrong with that? He says, I don't apologize to anybody. And he says, this is my house, and you will start following my rules. From now on, you're home at 11 p.m. He says, your house, your rules. He says, I don't got to be here. It's like, I got plenty of friends I could go to. He says, if you're living in my house, it's my rules. And he says, fine. The kid says, I don't need this. He runs upstairs. And the mother's like begging to him, like, please, no, don't let him leave. Please, he can't leave. The father's so upset, so he walks off. The mother's there, plants herself by the door. A few minutes go by, the son comes in with a backpack. And the mother's sitting over there and is begging him, please, I am begging you, don't leave, you're my baby, I love you, I care about you, you're my whole world, please stay. And for the first time in his life, he looks at his mother, calls her by the first name, and says, you better get out of my way or I'll make you get out of my way. And she's so shaken up, she's so scared, she goes on the side, and he opens the door and he slams the door and he runs out. And she falls on the floor, shaking and crying again. They don't hear from him. She calls the cell phone for months. They don't hear from him. Is he still alive? What's he doing? They don't know anything. 4 months go by, and every time that the phone rings, the mother jumps. She's like, it's my baby. He wants to come home. And he calls up and is like, you just won the lottery. Oh, just you? Like not interested. She is going, and she's plotting. She's waiting. Like, please, when is my baby going to come home? The call never came. A few months go by, and they get a letter in the mail from a hospital. Apparently, the boy overdosed, and he was brought into the hospital. And the father calls, they're calling the hospital, is everything okay? I'm the parents. Be like, yeah, no, everything is okay. He was discharged, but there is a bill to pay, and that's why we send it to the address that he had. And they were like, yeah, of course. The father goes, sends in a check right away to cover all the expenses. A few days later, he gets a phone call from the doctor in the hospital. And he says, listen, your son came in here, he's neglecting his health like I've never seen before. He says, we ran some tests, and it doesn't look good. He has some like serious kidney issues. We try to call him. We try to get him on the phone to come back to run more tests. He's not answering. He says, we can't get a hold of him. Please try. See what you can do to try to get him to come in. So now the father, the mother, are calling him 1,000 times that he doesn't answer. Eventually they hear this caller has blocked your whatever calls. And now they try to figure out his friends, and they call the friends. Finally, after weeks and weeks, they call the friends. And one of the friends answers and says, what do you want? And says, we're the parents. We want to know how our baby is doing. Please, he needs to go back to the hospital. He says he's fine. He does nothing. He wants nothing to do with you. Please leave him alone. He's taking care of himself. Click. Hangs up the phone. Months go by. They don't hear from him. The mother's calling, emailing him, begging him. Nothing. One morning, he wakes up, this boy. It's hard for him to breathe. His legs are swollen. He calls, he screams out to his friend, and his friend comes in, sees the swollen leg, seeing he's having a hard time to breathe. All of a sudden, they decide they're calling 911. They call 911, the hospital, the ambulance comes in, they take him straight to the ambulance. The second that they get to the hospital, they right away call the parents. Be like, your son is here, it doesn't look good. We just ran a bunch of tests. He's like, this is beyond not good. He's at kidney failure. The only option that we have right now is a transplant. We put him on the list, but it takes time. And that's one thing he doesn't have. And the mother rushes over to the hospital. And she runs right over to the doctor, and she says, test me. He says, like, test you for what? He says, test me if we're a match with my kid, with our kidneys. And he's like, are you sure this is a big operation? She said, test me, I'm not losing my baby. And he goes, and they go through all the tests, and they run the tests, and it's a match. So she goes over to them and says, listen, I want to donate my kidney to my son. But he cannot know that it is me, because I know who he is. I know how stubborn he is. If he finds out that I'm giving it, he's not going to want to take it. So you have to make sure that this is anonymous. And the doctor says, fine, not a problem. We could do that. And they go and they put them each on medications for a few days to get them ready for surgery. Eventually, the day of the surgery comes, and the mother goes over to the doctor and asks for a request. She says, listen, I haven't held my baby in so long. I haven't given him a hug or a kiss in so long. She says, can you do me a favor? Can you put him out first? Can you put him under the anesthesia first? So I want to just, before I go on there, I want to just give him one last hug, one last kiss. And he says, listen, it's an operating room, it's sterile procedure. And he saw the tears in the mother's eyes. He says, you know what, fine. He said they prepped her just for like surgery. They put her in a full sterile gown. They cleaned her up. They put her in the hat and everything. The father heard this, says, please, can I also join? And they said, sure. They did it, and they gave them all the criteria, what you're allowed to do. The mother walks in there. She sees her 16-year-old son sitting over there with a tube down and so beeping, and she right away bursts into tears. No anger, no nothing. She runs over, she holds him, she gives him a kiss, and she whispers into his ear, Mommy's here. Mommy's going to take care of you. Mommy's going to make sure that you're going to survive. And the father comes in and hugs and kisses her, and it's unbelievable. The doctors are all swelling up in tears. Finally, the doctor says, listen, it's time, we got to go. They go, and Baruch Hashem, the surgery was a success. The surgery was unbelievable. Everything went according to plan. And the mother went her separate way, the kid went his separate way. The kid never knew that the parents were involved in this, and the mother actually donated her kidney. Of a period of about 1 year, the parents are trying to go on contact, nothing. Another 2 years go by, and suddenly they hear through the grapevine that the boy met a girl. The problem was she was a non-Jewish girl. And he decided that he was going to marry her. And he said, this we have to stop. They go and they drive down, they figure it out, they beg him, they plead him. For the first time they saw him in like 3 years, they beg him and they say, please, please, calm down, I'll bring you to the business, you'll have plenty of money, I'll find you a nice Jewish girl. You can't do this, you can't throw this away. And the kid looked at him and says, I don't understand how you found me. He says, I don't want to ever see you again. He says, this is my life, I love her, and I'm marrying her, and you cannot do anything about that. And he runs, and not only does he go, he decides, I can't live in New York anymore. He goes to the West Coast, he goes to California. He moves into California. And he goes and he gets married to this girl. And the girl finds out that his father, a wealthy guy, he had a few properties. So she goes and she makes some phone calls, she gets some of her shady character friends, and says, listen, if you forge some signatures, and if you do certain things, he says, the properties could be under your name within 1 year. She figured out some sort of shady, way to do it. And he's like, fine, why do they need it? So they're old anyways, they're not going to use it, let's do it. And they go and he signs them up, and then they go and they do all these like crazy, forgery stuff, and they send it to this bank and to that bank, and then they get notarized. Crazy criminal activity. And a few months go by, everything looks good. The year goes by, year to date, when the property is supposed to go to him, he comes home, with a bouquet of flowers, that's it, now we're wealthy. comes in with a bouquet of flowers, bottle of wine, and he walks into front of his house. He sees a bunch of police everywhere. And he runs in, and he sees his wife sitting in the corner, shaking, crying, black and blue mark all over her face. And he's like, what's going on? And the cops go and they point to the wife and says, this is him? And she's like, yeah. And they go and they run and they push him against the wall, they handcuff him in the back, and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, this is my wife, this is my house, what are you doing? And he overhears her in the background. His non-Jewish wife goes and says, you don't understand, he beats me every single day. He says, he hurts me every single day. He says, just look at me. And he says, what? I never laid a hand on her. He says, I thought we had a great marriage. I thought we had an unbelievable relationship. And she's like, don't believe him. He's psychotic, he's crazy, he doesn't even talk to his parents. She goes and she convinces the police that he's an abusive husband. And they go and they lock him up. And a short while later, he gets out. And of course, within a short period of time, he gets handed divorce papers. And he gets a lawyer, and the lawyer gets in, and he doesn't understand what happened. As they're going through the proceedings, they meet with the other side. And the other lawyer says, I see you have a lot of properties under your name. He says, well, now, there was no prenup, there was no nothing. He says, now, half of it is going to her. And his heart just sank. He's like, oh no. And he started, hyperventilating. He's like, you can't take everything from mine, but you got to leave my parents out of it. And she would have nothing to say. She's like, you know what, I'm done with this conversation. She walks out. And he's sitting over there, he's pacing. He's like, I can't believe it. Within a few days, his father starts calling him off the hook, nonstop. He's like, leaving him voicemails. I'm getting these lawyers. What does this mean? That, the property's under your name, and now you got married, now you get divorced. He's like, what's going on? Call me back. He's so embarrassed he couldn't even call his father back. And he gets his lawyer, basically spilled his beans to his lawyer, tell him what happened. So the lawyer told him, listen, this is what's going to happen. He says, either your father's going to sign off the properties and say that he really signed it off on you, or he's going to go and prove that it's forgery, and he could do that. He says, but then you're going away for 10 years with a fine and not in a good place. So, he's so nervous. He's like, wait, I'm not going to call my father. He's like, every day he's waking up waiting for the cops to come knock on the door and put him in cuffs and take him away. But the day doesn't come. He goes to court. Father never shows up to court. Sends his lawyer to court. Father never shows up. Finally, the last day of court, the father's lawyer goes over to the son and says, listen, you should know you can relax. Your father's not turning you in. He signed off. Your ex-wife, your non-Jewish ex-wife, she's getting everything. You don't have to worry about it. He breathed a sigh of relief, but then he felt so bad. He's like, what did I do? He says, how did I do this? And he goes and she goes and she takes everything from him. She takes his apartment, his car, everything, and half of his father's properties. He goes, he has nowhere to live, nowhere to be. He calls up his friend and says, listen, can I stay by you for a little bit, please? And he says, yeah, for a little bit you can stay. He stays over there for a few weeks. Then he had an appointment to follow up with his nephrologist to check up on the kidney transplant, which he had to do every so often. He goes in, he's sitting over there, he's completely lost in his thoughts, what he's going to do with his life. And suddenly the doctor comes in, brings his chart, opens up, starts reviewing with him, and then suddenly they page a doctor, emergency in the other room. So the doctor runs out to the other room. Meanwhile, his chart is sitting there open. Any person gets a little bit curious. My chart, what does a doctor think of me? He goes in over there and he starts flipping through the pages of his chart. Then he sees, as he's scanning in, he sees donor, and he sees his mother's name. Donor, his mother's name. And then he sees, and then he goes, he's holding the papers, and he's like, what? And he's looking at it, he starts shaking. He drops the papers on the floor, and he rushes out of the doctor's office. Didn't even see the doctor. Secretary's like, wait, the doctors are coming in. Straight a beeline to the door. He runs home, and he's in his room, in his friend's house, and he's pulling his hair out. That night, his friend comes home. And he says, listen, we got to talk. He says, I understand you're staying here, I understand your situation, but you got to get out tonight. It's too much, I can't handle it. And he's like, please, I have nowhere to go. I have nothing. I have no money. I have no job. I have no car. I have literally nowhere to wear. He says, I'm sorry. I would love to have you stay over here, but you got to be out of here tonight. There's nothing else to do. He packs up his bags, the little things that he has in his backpack, and he goes out. He's walking around. He's like, where am I going to go? He doesn't have enough money for a hotel. He sits on the park bench, thinking about his ill fate, that what he has to do, and he falls asleep over there. He wakes up, and he sees somebody dropped a few dollars, next to him. Thought he was a homeless guy. He went and he bought something to eat, and this is how he lived for the next 2 weeks. Finally came to his wits end. He says, I can't do this anymore. He goes and he decides he's going to call his parents. He calls his parents, rings, voicemail. There's a long pause after the beep. He's like, what am I going to tell them? And he's like, you probably really don't want to hear from me right now, and I totally get it. I've done terrible things to you. He says, but I got nowhere else to go. I got nowhere else to turn to. He says, I have nothing. He says, I just sold my last possessions to get enough money to one-way plane ticket back to New York. He says, I have nothing for me over here anymore. And he goes and he says, I understand that you may never want to see me again. And I totally get that. He says, but I have nowhere to go once I land in the airport. So if you do want me back, please meet me at the airport. I'll be at JFK, 11 a.m. My flight's landing. And he hangs up the phone, gets on his flight. An hour later, the parents come home. They listen to the voicemail. They're unbelievable. They cannot sleep that night. They go and they're like preparing. The next morning, 6 a.m., they get to the airport. Flight doesn't land until 11. They get to the airport at 6 a.m. and they're like excited. They prepared stuff, and they go and the parents prepared a huge banner, not like a huge banner. You can see for like one that goes right under the train tracks, like a size like that. They called all the contacts that had prepared something beautiful, and in big letters they wrote back, "Welcome home, son. We love you, and we will always love you. Love, mom and dad." And on one side the father was holding it, and the other side the mother was elderly. She was with her walker. And she was holding the other side. And they're sitting there for hours. The son's flight's not even coming home. And they're just sitting there holding this. They're like beaming, waiting for their precious baby to come. And everybody that walks past by, sees this. And, they're taking pictures. And, people that see it, they swell up with tears. Look how beautiful it is. They don't know the backstory. And finally, they see a disheveled young man walk in. And he sees his parents. He sees the sign. He's holding this little backpack. He sees over there, and the mother is sitting over there, and she sees, she's like waving, hunched over from there, she's like waving, and the son starts running, and the mother just goes like this, like a little baby when they come out of kindergarten, and the mother's like, come to mommy, and he's like running, and that was how the scene played. He was running over, and the mother was like this, hunched over, waiting for him to come. He runs over, and he grabs his mother, and for the first time in his life, he cried like a baby. And he kept on saying, I'm so sorry. He's like, I'm so sorry for everything that I've done for you. He says, and he goes again, I'm sorry. And his mother's like, shh, mommy's here. Don't worry, everything's going to be okay. He goes home, comes in, and the law, they lived happily ever after. He lives in his mother's basement. I'm just kidding. He went and he built up his life. He fixed, he married a nice Jewish girl. He did, chazar b'tshuva. He really became who he was intended to become. When we come into Yom Kippur, no matter what we did, we have a Father in heaven. He's sitting over there and he's like, just come to Abba, come to Daddy. Daddy's waiting for you. And we come over there and we have the opportunity. Do we run? Or do we say, no, how many pages do we have left to do? It's an art school divided by 2, okay, until I can get out of here. You have the opportunity to connect to your Father in heaven, no matter what you did this past year, no matter what you did this past life. Explains Rabbi Fran something so amazing. When we look at Shmoneh Esrei, we go and we see that every bracha, we define God by what we're asking for. The specific salvation that we're asking for. So, chonen hadas, the bestower, the giver of knowledge, when we're asking for knowledge. Then we will say, Rofeh chole amo Yisrael. Go, someone who goes heals. We say, Bonei Yerushalayim, the builder of Jerusalem. Then says Rabbi Fran, there's something that sticks out, that makes absolutely no sense. When we speak about doing tshuva, in the bracha in Shmoneh Esrei, it says, Harotzeh b'tshuva. God who desires tshuva. Doesn't say desire by anything else. Why is it that when we come and we pray and we say, God, give us the ability to do tshuva, lachzor b'tshuva shlema lefnecha, and we go and we say, Baruch atah Hashem, harotzeh b'tshuva. You desire us to come back. Because God will tell you, He says, I could give you everything. I could give you money. I could build Jerusalem. I could give you brains. I could give you everything that you want. I give you shalom. I give you everything. But there's one thing that I can't give you. And that's for you to do tshuva. He says, but I want it. Oh, I want it so bad. God is waiting by that phone, so to speak. It's like, when is my baby going to call? When is my baby going to say, hey, I want to come home? Please take me home. And we come over there, and God is sitting there with outstretched arms. And He's just waiting for us. Just come. It's Yom Kippur. Come home to your Father in heaven. And B'ezrat Hashem, when you come home to your Father in heaven, and when we all do, we will come home not only to our home over here, but we'll come home to our true home in Yerushalayim. B'mehera b'yameinu. Thank you very much.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.